Matt Rose is a technical AppSec testing leader with consistent accomplishments in sales and sales engineering management roles with more than 20 years of experience. He was a key thought leader for two AST vendors growing from the startup phase to major acquisitions, Fortify and Checkmarks. Also, he's an accomplished public speaker, has been quoted in 50 plus AST industry media publications, and has an extensive background in AppSec, object-oriented programming, multi-tier architecture design and implementation, and internet development. Matt joins us to discuss how the software supply chain means different things to different people. We explore new avenues uncovered by the XZ compromise, and people spending too much time on the history of supply chain is a bit of a challenge for Matt. We also explore the concept of digital twins and how AI will impact the supply chain.
The Application Security Podcast is brought to you by Security Journey. Our training includes theory and immersive learning that teaches the skills and knowledge needed to create a security-first mindset across your organization. Learn more at securityjourney.com.
Hey folks, welcome to another episode of the Application Security Podcast. This is Chris Romeo. I am the CEO of Davici, a general partner at Kerr Ventures, and I also get to hang out with Robert, my friend, on this most awesome podcast. Robert, great to have you with us again, back from your travels around the globe, wherever that was on Earth.
Right. Hey, yeah, Robert Hurlbut. I'm a principal application security architect and threat modeling lead at Acquia. And yes, glad to be back and looking forward to our talk today.
Yeah, and we're excited to have Matt Rose join us. I've had the opportunity to sit on a webinar with Matt a number of months ago and found him to be a brilliant mind in the world of software supply chain security, probably a lot of other things too, but we just talked about software supply chain security in that context. But Matt, we always like to jump in and get right to your security origin story as fast as we can, just to lay the groundwork for our audience about where you're coming from.
No, absolutely. I mean, I can't believe I'm actually studying this, but it's here that I've been in the space and I fell into it by accident. Got called by a recruiter, software engineer for years, and then a consulting lead to implement different types of softwares or applications. And I got a call about the security company. And I'm like, well, I know firewalls. I know this stuff. Sure, let's talk about it. And it ended up being Fortify in the early days of Fortify when they were still being incubated in Kleiner Perkins' basement. And they had this scanning of the source code to find something called SQL injection and cross-site scripting. And I was like, all right, I'll take a look at it. And, long story short, I passed the tech screen and was with Fortify through acquisition by HP. And then I was with Checkmarks from the beginning days when they first started to build out in the US. And private equity purchase for over $1 billion by 8.5. Pretty much, I have no hair at I ran Asia Pacific, talked to a lot of great people over my career, like you, Chris, and you, Robert. Kind of found myself, because I'm a wealth of useless knowledge, doing a lot of evangelistic public, stirring the pot in terms of controversy about the industry, where it's been, where it's going. So, yeah, that's about it. I mean, and thank you for your kind words. I just bump with a lot of useless stories and analogies all pent up in my head.
So let me ask you this question. How good are you at Jeopardy?
I'm okay at Jeopardy. I really do well on the sports questions and some obscure categories. My wife is actually obsessed with Jeopardy, so she watches it every night. So I hold my own. But there's some categories like I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah, I'm the same way. My wife is also a rabid fan of Jeopardy. And just when you mentioned useless knowledge, that's what always gets thrown at me when I answer some obscure question that, the 14th century, blah, blah, blah. And I just take a guess. Like I'm guessing from my memory bank with whoever I think could be the possible person. She's like, how did you know that? I'm like, I just guess. That's all I do. Yeah. Good guesses.
I always say even a broken clock is right twice a day.
That's true. That is so true. That's a good way to look at our entire cybersecurity careers, I guess. That's a good way to describe a lot of programs out there. So, So Matt, let's set the stage a little bit here as a place to start. Now that we've heard kind of where you came from, your journey through the different companies and whatnot that you experienced. Software supply chain security, we think of it as a buzzword at this point. And what we see is it seems to mean different things to different people, depending on who we're talking to. And so we're curious to get a perspective on what's your definition of software supply chain security?
That's how much time do we have? Because that's a long-winded answer to a question, but I'll try and make
we
it as interesting.
we have a lot of gigabytes of data in the cloud, and so it translates to hours.
So it's all about perception in the eyes of the beholder is what software supply chain security is. And it's again, a buzzword in the industry, and people want to make themselves feel smart on top of things. So they just, start talking about software supply chain security. But when you really peel it back, what is it? Are we dealing with malware? Are we dealing with tooling? Are we dealing with firmware? Because a lot of times people immediately jump into, the embedded space because they think of a physical supply chain, like a automotive supply chain or a medical device supply chain. They can't wrap their head around the supply chain associated with building an application or a piece of software with code that has no physical thing. And that's kind of the thing that people really kind of focus on is either that tooling aspect or the firmware aspect, embedded space, or malware itself. And then one of the big things that I think is really doing a disservice to the industry is that SCA has been deemed the software supply chain security foundational technology. And the people on there, I'm assuming everybody knows SCA is software composition analysis. But again, if you only look for supply chain risk in the open source code, guess what? You're only going to find it in the open source code. Just like one of my biggest pet peeves is I hate shift left. I've been saying it for years. And the reason being is if you shift left, you only look for it, find things on the left. In modern software development, whether that's a supply chain lens or an application security lens, you have to be shifting everywhere because that entity with cloud native, microservices development, all these things, people only work in their little island. They don't talk to other people. They're very antisocial. So, and I still am reading promotional material, marketing material, white papers that are like, in order to be successful, you have to shift left and it'll save you X amount of dollars to find it in the beginning. And I know you guys are big into threat modeling. When is the beginning? Is the beginning the big bang of the first line of software that was ever written? Or is it just this continuous thing that we have to address?
Yeah, and I was celebrating your dislike of shift left there.
I hate it.
It's another one that I tend to make a lot of fun of this. Because I always come back to the concept is I agree with the concept, of course, right? But in the late 1990s, we called it building security in. Joe Jarzenbeck, that was at DHS, kind of groundbreaking work into embedding security into life cycles. But this is in the late 90s. And shift left is just this, it's just a marketing term that has been repurposed and reused. And it even, I did an analysis at one point and just searched around to see in all the different shifts that people have now incorporated. Our audience has heard me have rants against that for far too many moments. So
I, think about it this way too, quick little side note, tangential conversation. If you're shifting security left, how do you shift security left with one of your favorite technologies of DAST? How do you shift that left? How do you shift IAST, left? How do you do these things? It doesn't make any sense because you need a running application for those type of things. You need something to actually look at it in a later stage. And that's where I feel like shifting left is not the answer. And I think, again, security should be shifted everywhere, but I like to shift everywhere, remediate left. Because at the end of the day, you got to remediate on the left in the code typically. So it's remediation on the left, identification, or shifting everywhere.
Yeah, and for me, threat modeling is the perfect approach to how we can consider security and privacy from the beginning of the process, which is really what we're trying to achieve here. And lots of paper has been used to argue about how much it saves or whatnot. But I think common sense tells me that if I consider security and privacy when we have a new idea about something we're going to build, instead of waiting until we push code into production, it's going to save me something. Like it just logic, it would defy logic to say it will be cheaper to wait until we finish this thing and have to go through the rework process to include security than to do it up front. And for me, that's where threat modeling really shines. Is one, it helps the developers, it helps the people that are building to get a framework around considering security and privacy, because we know that's one of the big struggles that exists in the world is people that are writing code and designing code don't have a security and privacy foundation yet. It's getting better. I've watched it get better for a number of years, but we're still not there yet. And so that's why threat modeling is really the ultimate solution in my mind, because it does carry us all the way through the life cycle from this ideation stage where we can threat model somebody's idea all the way down till we have something in production. We could still do the same threat modeling consideration of production code.
Yeah, absolutely. And think about it this way. I mean, most of the things you're looking for are vulnerability. And what are vulnerabilities? Going outside the bounds of the intended purpose or the intended functionality. So a SaaS solution or whatever star AST solution I like to call them is looking at something structural. It's looking at A, B, C has to happen, and here's a vulnerability, and here's how you fix said vulnerability. But you can actually be much more proactive with that threat modeling approach to say, hypothetically, what could happen here? And then put in the checks, balances, protections at the appropriate place that's not as structured. It has to be a little more deep thinking in terms of, hey, what could go wrong and how could it go wrong? And let's bake that in from a secure by design standpoint.
Yeah, 100%. And I like to think of weaknesses in the early stages before we get to production, especially in the design phase, because for me, when we get a vulnerability doesn't become a vulnerability until we have some code written down.
Mm-hmm.
But a weakness is something that can exist in a design structure. And so when we're in those early stages, we're looking for weaknesses in my mind. And then when we cross over into code, that's where we start searching for vulnerabilities, because we don't have a good way to scan the design process at this point, because the design process itself is, it is a design. It can be in so many different things. It can be in somebody's head. It can be a conversation that Robert and I have to design a feature that we're not even writing it down. We're just talking about how we're going to design it. And so really for me, it's like, how do we get to those weaknesses? But then vulnerabilities become a thing that manifests with any of those weaknesses that we don't properly catch. Sometimes we just miss some of them along the way too. I know, Robert, you were thinking about the XZ library. So what was the question you had on that?
Yeah, just talk to us about that. I know it's a fairly recent or relatively recent thing that happened, but what new avenues were exposed through analyzing the XZ library compromise?
I'm not a total expert. Again, I've been doing a little bit of research in some other areas, but again, it's the biggest thing to think about any type of library that's compromised is what is in there, how did it get in there, and what is the path to success? I know, Chris, we talked about this, but I mean, I won't mention it because I won't steal your thunder. You know, past software supply chain attacks are starting to get beat up and getting a little old. But it's staying diligent because people get, well, it hasn't happened in a while. Why should I care about it? Why should I care about the software supply chain or malware or typo squatting? Nobody's really been dinged by this yet. So I really think that the process is to stay diligent as much as possible. But again, to be a little controversial within software supply chain, I just don't think people are taking it seriously. I mean, these things are major when they happen, but they don't happen a lot. So people are like, hey, not my circus, not my monkey. One of my favorite sayings is, hey, I haven't been attacked. Other companies have been attacked, but I'm just going to wait it out because I don't want to spend the time, resources, or budget to actually address these things. And the biggest problem is that YAS conversation. And that's my favorite acronym these days, is yet another security tool. We're overlaying these all over the place, automating. And now we even got technologies, which I'm very pro, like application security posture management or cloud security posture management. I just think that people are so tired of it and they're willing to bite the bullet. Because I'm seeing a lot of people talk about software supply chain security, but only the bleeding edge type of companies are taking it seriously. And I mean, what's your guys' thought on this? I mean, any of these things, it's just the same thing over and over again. There's a path that's never been seen before. It's novel. It's new. It's malware got into the build system. Malware got into stealing credential. Malware got in by, I don't know, getting credentials for a developer's code repo. These are all like social engineer type of activities that, Chris, I think threat modeling goes hand in hand with. So I think that aspect of threat modeling with supply chain is much more tightly coupled than, say, a star scanner like SAST or DAST or something like that.
Yeah, and you just made me think of something about when you were talking about this kind of rhythm of people say, well, this can't happen to me. This software supply chain is not going to be a problem for me. I started in security in 1997. So I got to, and Robert, we're from the same vintage as well. We got to watch the same thing happen in the data breach world, starting around, I feel like it was around 2001, 2002, where it really got moving. And you had the same thing. Somebody would get popped, and then other people, and then you would go to management people and say, well, we need to start investing more in security. We need to step up our game. Well, it didn't happen here. It hasn't happened to us. So it feels like you're describing, like there's almost like a parallel between the data breach of the 2000s leading up to 2010 or so, and what's happened in software supply chain in the last number of years. It seems like we're in that same kind of rhythm right now, which we know how the data breach rhythm, eventually so many people got popped that people started to pay attention. So, I mean, is that where the supply chain is going to go, do you think?
I think so. I think it's got to become more streamlined in terms of the process. And, I think the industry has to define it a lot better than it does because, again, people latch on to buzzwords, they use them, they don't really understand them. And I think that supply chain and malware is a big problem because think about it this way. With normal application security or hacking attempts, they're trying to steal an individual's PII data, their credit card data, their name, social security number, DOB, whatever that thing is. But they got to go through a cycle of attack or the long con to get all that information, scraping social media, a data breach where they get a little bit of information. It's a lot of work and it's time consuming. It's more work, yes, for a software supply chain breach to find a way to get malware into some sort of build pipeline to compromise it. But once you do it, you let that company propagate your malware, propagate your attack. So I think that the thing people have to realize is they are the target now because nobody wants to go the onesie twosie route or, hack Joe, Steve, and Bob when they can actually hack 10,000 people by just leveraging or compromising a piece of enterprise software or application.
Yeah,
And
it seems like there's a perfect storm brewing,
yeah,
and it feels like a lot of people are on the canoe. It's just paddling away going, it's going to be fine. It's going to be we're not going to get knocked over by this giant wave. But it's like if the camera pans back in the movie and we can see the wave growing and picking up speed. And so I guess the question is, when's it going to hit? When do you think it's going to hit?
I'll give you another analogy. It's Caddyshack. I don't think the hard stuff's coming down for a while. If you are a Caddyshack fan with the rain, I mean, I think it's, the mandates from executive office and a lot of the governmental stuff, I think is pushing it. And I think it's going to become cemented into anybody that wants to deal with DOD or civilian agencies, and then that'll trickle down and probably take a little while, but I'm thinking a year or two, it'll become more mainstream. The problem is, again, we have so many tools. You go to RSA, you go to Black Hat, you got so many vendors out there with so many different avenues of trying to do something. People are just overloaded. I mean, in my opinion, this is my opinion. If you want a secure application, secure software supply chain, you should have every one of these tools, because they all do something really good. They, even if it's 2% of the product, they all do something, but it's just not feasible. It's not feasible for the care and feeding, the budgets, the headcount to operate this stuff. So, and people are just overwhelmed with too many vulnerabilities these days, too many things to look through. And it's kind of like, all right, I'll do a little bit. I'll get my backlog down a little bit, but it's never going to be zero. And now you want to layer on more risk or more, an additional lens of risk with supply chain risk and malware and typo squatting and securing the pipeline. It's a lot for people to swallow. And that's why I think that people are struggling with it. They don't have time already, and you want to put fire on a smoldering, gasoline on a smoldering fire.
I want to double click on something that you mentioned earlier, and I didn't get a chance to address this earlier, but I do want to get some more context on your take on SCA. So you made a comment to the effect that almost like people think of SCA as software supply chain security, and there's so much more to it. So can you give us a little more context on that for somebody? Because let's imagine we've got some people listening. I know we do. We've got people at different stages of their AppSec journey. Some people are brand new to AppSec. Some people are, decades and decades of experience. How would you address this to somebody that is one of the newer people, perhaps they've gone to conferences, they've heard people say SCA, you have to do SDA. What would you give them advice about in regards to SCA?
Yeah, can you see my circle here? Because I mean,
Yep.
SCA is all these tools are important because they all serve a purpose. They're all good at what they're designed for. SCA was never designed to look for malware. It was designed to look for vulnerabilities or risky package, inheritance, reachability within the open source packages. And that's, here's my little thing. I'll draw it over here so you can see it a little better. These are all pieces of the puzzle. So you have your open source, you have your first party code, you have COTS. These are all things you have to consider, is all of these little different areas. And if you just say, well, and this is the thing that people got caught up in and why SDA has become a household acronym, is that depending on who you read, is 60 to 90% of all modern software and applications are open source. Okay, that's a big number, a big sliding scale. I've seen it sometimes as much as like 40 to 90%. Even if it is 90%, you still have 10% of other things in there. The first party code you've written, the COTS packages, the APIs going out to do some sort of functionality or data retrieval. So if you're just using SCA as your de facto standard of supply chain security or application security, you're only basing risk in the open source package. There's many different things, as we've seen out there with the first party code, with the potential for malware being inserted, with user credentials being stolen. So don't think of SCA as the end all be all. The proof is in the pudding that all of these major SCA vendors that have come in and initially had their marketing messaging and statements as all you need is SCA because blah, 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 60 to 90% is open source. Just secure the open source and you're good. All those vendors are now adding API scanning, SAST, manual pen testing. So they're basically contradicting themselves by adding these additional technologies because at the end of the day, beginning of the story was all you need is SCA. Do you agree with that? I mean, it just seems like they're all growing to more of a platform play because they realize it's not.
I mean, I think that's more of a startup growth problem than it is when you think about how crowded the SCA market became. I mean, we could probably sit here and come up with a list. There's probably 20 tools, SCA tools. And then if you start weaving in the open source, there's probably another 20. When you think about all the different tools for different, there's stuff for Node, there's stuff for Python, there's various things. There's NPM audit, from a Node package manager perspective that you can do without paying any money. So my gut says it's more of it's a startup growth problem as to why they're expanding beyond that than them not thinking the technology or thinking that their answer to the story is changing. It's tough to have 100% year over year growth in a market that's commoditizing itself just because of interest. And I know, Matt, you've been through a number of startups along the way in your journey. So what's your take on, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think I'm onto something here?
No, I am. I mean, it's just a question of, buyer beware is what I'm saying. It's like, early stage companies, they have the holy grail technology, and then they start adding side dishes or other capabilities just to keep those lights on and grow the ARR for the company. But again, it's the same thing was told with IAST. All you need is IAST. You don't need FAST. I mean, all these things are trying to contradict themselves. And that's why kind of having a platform play or a stitched together best of breed application security initiative, all tied together by application security posture management, is the way to go. Because again, if you hook your wagon up to one horse, you're not going to get there very fast. You need a team of horses to get there much faster.
If we just let's push all these star AST tools off to the side for a second and just laser focus in on what you think of as the software supply chain security market. What percentage do you think SCA gets you of the overall software supply chain security solution that a small or a medium-sized startup to a modern enterprise should have a strong software supply chain security program in using some type of technology? So how far does SCA get me? Is it 10%? Is it 50%? What do you think?
I'd say 30 to 40, 30%. Somewhere in there. Because again, you're not addressing malware. You're not addressing the tooling. So, I mean, it's definitely an important piece and it's a significant piece, but it's not going to be 70, 80, 90% of the way there. I mean,
Is it
based
the
on,
first? Is it the first thing you would like? Is it the low hanging fruit of the software supply chain? Like the easiest thing to implement?
oh yeah, I think that's why it was successful. It is easy. You just, throw the open source packages at a SCA solution, you get your results. And that's pretty easy. It's pretty straightforward. But again, it's not like the graduate level course, like threat modeling or something like that, which takes a little more time, resources, and expertise. I mean, you're not addressing malware with SCA. I mean, that's one of the things is,
No.
at the end of the day, malware is the three-headed scary monster in software supply chain risk. And it's, you lock down the tooling to make sure that malware doesn't get in there. You lock down the credentials so malware doesn't get in there. So at the end of the day, it's malware and then work backwards to the different avenue, whether that's, a vulnerability or malware in an open source package or your first party code or compromising your build or even your code repo or even, your TPRM, third party risk management of malware gets into your network through something that you bought commercially. So again,
Yeah.
it's like malware is the tip of the spear and then it kind of expands out like tentacles.
Matt, what are your thoughts on digital twins and use of those today?
So I think it's a graduate level class. So to go through that whole process to actually do the care and feeding of two separate build pipeline to make sure that, not only verifying one release versus another, you're basically looking at the pipeline potential. But again, not everybody has that or has the budget to support that. Only the bleeding blue chip cybersecurity or Fortune, whatever 110 companies have that type of budget. People like to talk about these things, but again, in practice, they're like, I want to talk about digital twins or reproducible builds. The question is, okay, do you have that in place? Well, no. Okay, so how can we talk about it? And a real world example I used to have when I was first with Fortify, had huge press releases and all these white papers about cross-tier data flow analysis, which at that time was a very cool concept. So you could basically follow a data flow from one coding language to another, like say Java to JavaScript back to Java, and watch that flow of execution across languages when usually SAS scanners are unique to a language. They have different scanners, but they actually do that cross-tier. People are like, oh my God, that is the coolest thing ever. I want to see that. They use the product, they scan the code, and they don't find it. You know why? Because the structure doesn't exist. They don't have any specific calls that are actually doing a data flow that's somewhat dangerous from Java to JavaScript to Java. So they're like, well, why should I care about it? That's the thing is digital twins are reproducible builds. If you don't have the program in place or the initiative to do it, it's not even worth talking about. It's very valuable, but again, now you're responsible for the care and feeding of two clones of the same thing. I mean, what's your guys' thoughts on it? I mean, you probably see a lot of different examples.
Yeah, I've never actually seen anybody do it. I've heard DJ Schleen talk about it in the past in the context, and I don't know if that means he's achieved it in any of the companies, but I've never actually seen anybody that could prove that they were doing it at scale. You may have people that are able to do it from a one-off perspective. Oh yeah, we have this project that's doing it, but you think about being able to do that across. So, it's one thing if you're a startup that has one product, one SaaS platform that you're building everything through one pipeline. Okay, we can make a second pipeline. But if you have 500 different cloud-based applications, and then now you're trying to double the pipeline. And the more I think about digital twins, though, the more I think like, yes, it is a layer in the proverbial onion of defense in depth, right? Because we're adding another hoop that somebody has to jump through. But if they can get into one pipeline, what's going to prevent them from getting into the other pipeline and just replicating the same thing? Or if you get a downstream package compromise like XZ, where if it hadn't been found so fast and it was being propagated and both build pipelines are pulling the same trash in, they're going to come. So I'm starting to almost question I'm starting to wonder, is it worth the investment and the amount of headache that it puts into the process, is it really moving the security needle that much forward for me? I'm starting to struggle to see how it is.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I mean, yeah, there's a time and place for everything. I mean, I just don't think it's worth the time, effort, and budget to do it. I mean, how is that going to be any different than doing a diff of version 1.1 to 1.2? Now you're doing, version 1.1 on build 1, build 1.1 on build 2, and now you're actually comparing, horizontal and linear in terms of, across this way of what each pipeline's producing, and then comparing them to themselves.
Yeah.
Again, we're dealing with YAS. Now we got another layer of, alert fatigue. Now we're giving an additional layer of investigation that's required.
Yeah. How about AI? As we know, everybody is gaga for AI in the world right now of every vertical, every industry. Everybody's concerned AI is going to take away their job. Well, some people are. When we think about software supply chain security, what futuristic things does AI open up for us as possibilities?
I think it's that ability to get through that alert fatigue and use, kind of the ability of AI to crunch a lot of information and say, hey, this, blue cat, yellow dog, and a, cloudy day typically means this. I mean, I'm just being facetious and trying to be humorous, but disassociative things coming together has produced risk before. But even to take a step back, everyone's so gaga about AI and even writing code for you and vetting code. It's like the fox guarding the henhouse in my mind. I mean, AI is, if I'm not really off base, software in itself. It's not just like a box that, is autonomous and thinks for itself, and it's software in itself. And that software can be compromised just like the banking app or the e-commerce app or the ERP app, whatever that is. So now you're basically, giving the keys to the castle on something that may be compromised from a supply chain risk or an application security risk in the code level, or even in the large language model that it's leveraging. So, I mean, it's like the data is poisoned. So people can have different ways, attack the data or attack the software. So yes, there is very amazing things that AI would do, but we can't even secure the applications that we're writing today. I mean, I've been doing this, 20 years, Chris, Robert, you guys have too. We're still looking for SQL injection, cross-site scripting. I mean, we're still looking for privacy violations or, dumping important PII data to log files. I mean, simple, stupid stuff. And now we're basically writing something that's going to do all that for you. Again, I think it's the fox guarding the henhouse. The checks and balances have to be even more stringent than what you do for securing those platforms above and beyond just normal applications for functionality.
Yeah, I've started to refer to the AI as an intern. I think we need to treat the AI like an intern. We wouldn't give an intern the ability to push to production. We wouldn't give an intern the ability to commit code without it being very highly scrutinized by multiple people. Multiple other humans would be, and automated tools are run against code that an intern writes to ensure that they're not introducing some new security vulnerability or something that is part of the corpus of knowledge that we've assembled as an organization. And we, managed to eradicate a particular type of issue that an intern may not know about. And so I think that's a safer way to compartmentalize or box what AI can do and what we allow it to do. Don't give it any more permissions than you would give to an intern at this point.
Yeah, and think about it this way too. The, supply chain solutions, whether it's looking for malware or looking for vulnerabilities in packages or, application security, looking for OS top 10 type issues. One of the things being in the space and representing, Fortify and Checkmarks and other companies was the concept of auto-remediation, which is a very scary thing. If you're talking about a lines of code and say you don't understand the whole story, compensating controls that aren't even part of the code base, you have something that is a homegrown sanitization routine that's unique to your specific account number format. These solutions were never really allowed to do that auto remediation because it was a risk. What if that auto remediation missed something and now you think you're secure and you just, open up the doors to the castle? Now we're doing that same thing for the auto remediation. We're just calling it AI.
Yeah, I'm not ready to embrace auto remediation at this point. I'm optimistic because I've seen some cool things by some different startups like Pixie and Mob are
Mm-hmm.
they're doing some cool things. I'm not ready to turn it loose in my production environment yet at this point. I still want to see more testing and more evaluation going into what is it able to do. But I think to your earlier point, the alert fatigue is someplace that's burying every organization right now. Like
Mm-hmm.
everybody has got too many alerts being generated by too many blinky lights and too many beeps and stuff that are coming into their environment. And so if we could use the AI to do what I think it's the best at doing, which is summarization, which is really the primary thing I use AI for, is take this text and summarize it down for me into 2 sentences so that I can get a general idea of what this block is looking at. If we extrapolate that out to, we've got 10,000 alerts coming in, it seems like the AI should be able to process those 10,000 alerts and summarize them in such a way that it improves the operating ability of the SOC analyst or the AppSec engineer so that they can
Agreed.
have better, they can focus in on the things that are most important. And so that's really, I think of AI as it's the intern that makes you 20% better at doing your job. And I think that's where we're going to be for the next number of years. Is there going to be another jump into, more of a artificial general intelligence? Yes, I think that's coming in the future, but I think what we have now is not, it's not that. It's simply a summarization, and I'm not ready to trust the code that comes out of it because I've seen nothing to say that it can write secure code.
No, it's again, it's doing the spec, but it's not anticipating going outside the bounds of the intended purpose. And that's the thing I look at is it helping or is it hurting? But I think that processing of large amounts of data to summarize, to quantify, qualify, whatever you want to call it, is the best way to go. And maybe there should be, a ranking system or some sort of flagging system that, hey, yeah, you can write mundane code that you can allow it to write mundane code that, I don't know, creates job descriptions or something like that. But if it touches PII data, financial data, or any type of secrets manipulation, it's not allowed, that you can't use it to generate code for that orchestra. So I think it's kind of like a separation of church and state. It can basically
Yeah.
be used for the things that it's not really dangerous, and the things that are dangerous, you keep it away from.
Yeah, and we're starting to see a whole cottage industry of startups that are focused on access control and authorization at the LLM
Mm-hmm.
edge, which I think it's opening up a whole new market of how do we control the requests that go in? How do we ensure that the requests aren't doing something that is going to generate a negative result? How do we check the results coming back out of the LLM? So I'm curious to see where that goes. I haven't seen anything yet I haven't, I don't think they're mature enough yet I think they're just kind of coming out of stealth, those companies that are doing that type of thing. But I'm excited to see where those organizations go. All
Oh,
right.
agreed.
I think it's time for the we have a new sponsor of the lightning round. It's Robert's lightning round, sponsored by Robert.
All right. So we have 3 questions that we ask. The first one's the controversial one. What's your most controversial opinion on application security, and why do you hold this view?
People attach themselves to words and use them ad nauseum. The shift left we already touched on. My other favorite one was agile. Oh, we're agile DevOps. We're agile in our development. And people just say it. I'm like, what are we talking about? Agile in what way? Are you like flexible, or you just release a lot? The new term that is all over the place is posture. Everybody has really posture. Remember, you kid, you had the scoliosis test and see if your posture was good. That's what we're doing right now. We're checking everybody's scoliosis. So it's these buzzwords. So it went from shift left to agile. Now it's posture, and who knows what the next one could be, because all of a sudden you just have 30 different flavors of posture.
Let me interject this really quick story in regards to agile. So when I was at Cisco, agile was just becoming like a really big thing, and it was so popular. And being part of the central security team, we were responsible for the security development lifecycle and how does it adapt into various methodologies. And so I would go around and people would be like, "Oh yeah, we're using agile." I'd be like, oh yeah, cool. What does that mean? And every definition got different definitions from people. And it was a very funny response because everybody thought they knew what it meant inside the same company. And they were all using different definitions and different words and different things. There was no standard to it. So I've seen that as well, Matt.
Yeah, it's people just want to sound smart. So
Absolutely. The second question is, what would it say if you could display a single message on a billboard at the RSA or Black Hat conference?
is your AI real? So thinking about it that way, I know for a fact people market to themselves, like a lot of startups will basically say, hey, we use AI to vet this. Not really the AI, it's artificial individuals in a back room pouring over stuff. And they're like, look it, the magical AI did this. It's like the Wizard of Oz, the man behind the curtain. So
Right.
I would say is, do the sniff test on your AI. Is it true AI or is it an artificial individual that is, pretending to be the Wizard of Oz?
Yeah, my favorite question to ask companies now when I'll be evaluating a company that'll come and be looking for investment or something, yeah, say, oh yeah, we're using AI. I'm like, oh really? What LM? What model are you using? Well, we're using this one from OpenAI. Oh yeah, ChatGPT. You mean that one? Oh, okay, the one that's not proprietary to anything you're doing and really doesn't add any value to your company or to your total worth of what the total amount the company's going to be worth in the future. So that's my favorite question to ask people is what model are you using? Because people aren't doing things from a proprietary nature. And if it's not proprietary, it doesn't add any value to the company. Yes, it might have a flashy feature or something, but if you're using ChatGPT to do it, I could do the same thing. You're training ChatGPT so that I can plug into it later and build the same feature for my platform.
Yep.
All right. And our third question is, what's your top book recommendation and why do you find it valuable?
Well, a little nepotism here. It's Derek Fisher's The Application Security Program Handbook. I'm good friends with Derek, and he asked me to write the foreword on it. And everyone that I've talked to that has read it has really enjoyed the book. So I'd really push from a technology book is that Application Security Handbook or Application Security Program Handbook. And I think it's by Manning Publishers.
Derek's a friend of the show, so he's done a couple episodes with us before. So
Derek and I have done a bunch of stuff. He's a great guy.
Yeah, we did the first episode after the book came out. Like the first podcast he did we happened to have scheduled it. And so we got a chance to take a look at the book right when it first came out. So yeah, great book as well. Highly recommend it for people that are trying to understand the AppSec program and the way all the pieces go together. Good stuff.
For personal books, I love Stephen E. Ambrose's stuff about World War II and Mark Frost's about sports. So those are two other authors that people that are into World War II stuff or sports type stories about golf and baseball. Those are two authors I'd look at.
Very cool. Well, Matt, we've come to the end of our conversation here. And so any key takeaways or call to actions that you would like to leave our audience with? Some homework, perhaps?
I think the biggest thing is people have to change the way they perceive or want to learn about technology. It's something that I'm very passionate about. And I've been doing some posts on LinkedIn and things like that, some unofficial polls to say, we need to change the way we digest information. There's just too much of it. And I know a lot of people that have early stage startups and they're like, I just can't get traction. Nobody knows who I am. No, it's like, I just did this amazing 30-page white paper. I'm doing webinars each week with XYZ. And I'm like, are they the same old, same old? You got to stand out and be different. And you got to actually have a different approach to solving problems. And the biggest thing that I see people do is they talk a lot and they don't listen very much. So as you're navigating the software supply chain or application security world, do it in a way that you can find things that are of interest without having to, commit to reading that 30-page paper. There's a lot of great people, like we mentioned, Derek Fisher, and, you mentioned Chris Hughes. I think the best way to learn is through LinkedIn and follow a group of people that are good influencers. They release great stuff and it's really interesting and you learn things kind of organically, not in a forced way.
Yeah, good point. I know I learn a lot And I've been around this business for a long time, and I'm still learning new things from following people like the folks you just described, like Derek and Chris, and a lot of other people that just write stuff on LinkedIn, because it's a good way to get there's some things that I learned that I just didn't know that I needed to learn them, or I was going to learn them today, because they're not something I was searching out for, but I happen to see like Chris Hughes write something and I read it and I'm like, oh, very cool. Like this is something I didn't know before. And now I have a better understanding of it, and it helps to just make me a well-rounded security professional.
Yeah, and I look at it too. It's a good way to validate. We all have epiphanies every day, usually over, I don't know, coffee or cereal or a sandwich. And then you have this epiphany, and then to see somebody have that same epiphany that you respect, it's a good way to kind of do that validation within yourself. Because a lot of these things I read, I'm like, yep, I agree with that 100%, or that's a different take. Maybe I should reassess the way I'd like to approach that. I think it's a crowdsourcing way to learn things.
Definitely. Cool. Well, Matt, thanks for being a guest here on the Application Security Podcast. We look forward to having you back for a future conversation about something else, and maybe we'll let you get a chance to even draw on your board more. I wish I had the ability to draw on boards like that. Not two things I've tried in the past many years ago, and it just doesn't compute with the way my brain works. But so I love to see graphics and visualization. So
Yeah, very
all
cool.
good stuff.
Awesome.
And we'll look forward to talking to you again in the future.
Well, thanks for having me, guys.